The special prosecutor in the beating death of an inmate at the Marcy Correctional Facility recently offered plea deals to the 10 corrections officers charged with murder. Now, details of the plea offer from Onondaga County District Attorney William Fitzpatrick are still under wraps, but the gruesome details of the beating itself were captured in video recordings. They prompted the governor to clean house and the rest of us, the rest of the public, to have serious conversations about whether Mr. Roberts' death is just the tip of the iceberg and what to do about it if it isn't. So what's the reaction to this incident, Anirban, on your part?
Yeah, this is a very gruesome incident, and it was accidentally caught on camera, right? And this is not one-off incident, right? Marshall Project, for example, with New York Times did investigative reporting for, a few years ago, and they found out that, abuse of prisoners by prison guards is quite endemic, and one can go into various anecdotal stuff. For example, in Auburn Correctional Facility in West Syracuse, a guard kicked a man and called him a racial slur. In March 2020, Officer Aaron Finn handcuffed a prisoner called Melvin Virgil at the Green Haven Correctional Facility and repeatedly smashed his head into a wall and steel bars. This was also captured on camera. But what the Marshall Project points out, that even when the Department of Corrections in New York itself had accused officers for abusing prisoners, they only got conviction in only 10% of cases. And that is because of certain kinds of very rigid contracts that the state signs with these, with the prison guards union. And those contracts create certain hindrances towards prosecuting bad actors. Now, don't get me wrong, what these prison guards are doing day in and day out is a very difficult job. The prison population sometimes, they have done heinous crimes, they are not in their sane mind, they sometimes are confrontational with prison guards. But, justice cannot be seen as where we dish out a sort of vengeful retribution to people who are criminals, and that cannot continue. So maybe a ombudsman, a kind of a committee which has representation from prison guards and citizens groups, advocacy groups, that can create a certain kind of transparency and trust in that system.
And perhaps where there are hotspots, right? We talk about hotspots for policing, but you mentioned the prison problems across the country. Here in this facility, it was found a couple of years beforehand that over 80% of the inmates complained of physical and verbal and sexual abuse. 60% complained of racial abuse. So perhaps there is a way for the state to channel its resources in ways that will be more effective.
Yeah, coming off a cold, of course. So I would say that there really is some need for better oversight of these facilities. The Correctional Association of New York is a it's basically a nonprofit tasked to track the prisoner abuses that you mentioned. But we don't have a similar independent body that's also tracking violence against corrections officers. The strike that that has just ended, one of the pieces of evidence that correction officers were citing as reason for their strike is that they were under increased attacks and assaults by prisoners. But when you look at the data, it's actually very uneven. And that's, again, collected by the Department of Corrections. And so, I think there isn't a lot of transparency. There isn't enough oversight. There's been a churn as of late in terms of the administration overseeing the Department of Corrections. There clearly is a need for substantial reform.
And with our political culture, we tend to think about things in individualistic terms. And I think the social dynamics of prisons are worth considering as well. As Anirban referenced, it's a hard environment. I would say it's inhumane, and that impacts not only the people who are incarcerated, but the people who are responsible for keeping them essentially in cages. So one thing we can think about, in addition to what has been mentioned, is state law. There's been some bills that have been proposed that seek to change those dynamics in ways that I think are productive. The Earned Time Act, for instance, helps create incentives for inmates that also benefits corrections officers, in that if inmates follow the rules, engage in treatment, vocational training, education, these types of things, they could be considered for early release. And I think trying to think of these ways to get cooperation and a symbiotic relationship between the correction officers and the inmates, both of whom are in difficult positions, would help everybody and help the community, because recidivism rates are high, and if we can get these skills while people are incarcerated, it helps when they come out, for them and the group.
Yeah, and it almost seems like, Luke, you've touched on a critical issue, which is, as a society, have we forgotten what the purpose of prisons is, both to punish, but also to rehabilitate? And are we pouring not only funds into the sorts of things that you talked about, but also for corrections officers? Because the strike that you mentioned was because of understaffing and being overworked, forced overtime. And so the plight of the corrections officers is very closely tied to the safety of prisoners.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. And when going back to you, there are studies where, if the prisoner stays in a very unsafe and hostile environment, where they are, of course, fearing from other prisoners and a kind of an endemic abuse towards prisoners by bad actors among prison guards, then it becomes very difficult for them to come out and lead a lawful life. And that creates the cycle of violence and the recidivism. So a more humane system of imprisonment could create better outcomes. That's the word correctional. Let's put the word correctional in the correctional facility in the correct manner, if you will.
I think it's worth noting that drug addiction and mental illness are two main reasons that people are incarcerated. Right. So the more we can help those people in those situations that are incarcerated, again, the better it is for them and the better it is for the community.
So I say this on everybody's behalf, our condolences to the family of Mr. Brooks, and perhaps this very unfortunate incident will spur the kinds of reforms that we've talked about.